Every time iBasso releases a new Max series player, I find myself asking the same question. Who exactly is this for? Because if we're being honest, the standard DX340 is already excellent. It's already one of the best digital audio players I've heard. So when iBasso takes that player, makes it larger, heavier, more complicated and significantly more expensive, my first reaction isn't excitement, it's skepticism. The DX340 MAX costs enough money to buy a serious desktop headphone setup. It carries 4 batteries and it weighs almost as much as a small laptop. And yet, after a few weeks of listening, I keep finding reasons to pick it up. Not because it measures better, not because the spec sheet is longer, but because every time I sit down and listen to it, something interesting happens. So in this video I want to figure out whether the DX340 MAX is genuinely better than the regular DX340 and, perhaps more importantly, whether it's actually worth it. The DX340 MAX isn't attempting to be practical. It's attempting to be uncompromising. And those are two very different things. The obvious place to start is with the engineering, because the DX340 MAX isn't just a regular DX340 with a bigger battery. Internally, iBasso has gone much further than that. And whether you think these kind of design decisions matter sonically or not, you can at least appreciate the ambition. The biggest talking point is the power architecture. Instead of relying on a conventional battery arrangement, iBasso has separated the digital and analog sections into their own dedicated power systems. There are 4 batteries inside this player. The goal is to isolate the audio circuitry from the noise generated by the digital section. It's a very desktop audio way of thinking applied to a portable device. Now, whether those decisions alone justify the price difference is something we'll come back to later, but they're certainly part of what makes the MAX unique. The DAC implementation is equally ambitious. Rather than relying on a conventional DAC chip, iBasso continues down its discrete 1-bit design path. This is one of those areas where the company is clearly trying to differentiate itself from the crowd. Most manufacturers buy a DAC chip. iBasso appears more interested in building its own solution. But here's something I wasn't expecting. One of the most meaningful improvements over the previous DX320 MAX isn't audio related at all. It is usability. The DX320 MAX sounded fantastic. Nobody was questioning that. But it often felt like a specialist device first and an Android device second. The DX340 MAX feels different. The interface is faster, apps launch quicker, scrolling feels smoother, streaming services behave more like they do on a modern smartphone. And over the course of several weeks, that improvement became surprisingly important. Because no matter how good something sounds, if operating it feels slow or clunky, you notice. The DX340 MAX largely gets out of its own way. Eventually though, all roads lead back to sound, because that's why this player exists. Not for Android, not for battery architecture, not for bragging rights, for sound. And I spent most of my listening time with two very different transducers, the iBasso Epitome and the Fosi Audio i5. The Epitome feels like the obvious partner, same company, similar design philosophy and a shared focus on resolution. First track I kept returning to was Fleetwood Mac's Dreams, not because it's an audiophile recording, but because it's familiar, and familiarity is useful. What struck me wasn't detail. I anticipated this setup to be detailed. What struck me was organization. The DX340 MAX seems unusually good at untangling complex recordings and presenting them as separate musical elements, rather than a single event. Vocals occupy their own space, bass occupies its own space, percussion occupies its own space, nothing feels crowded. Then I switched to Dave Brubeck's Take 5, and this is where timing became the story. The DX340 MAX sounds fast, not bright, not aggressive, fast. Transients appear sharply defined, the rhythm section feels exceptionally coherent. And there's a sense that the player is doing very little editorializing. It's simply presenting what's there. The Fosi i5 took things in a slightly different direction. With Lord's Royals, the DX340 MAX demonstrated something equally impressive: effortlessness. The i5 isn't especially difficult to drive, but it responds well to power, and the Max never sounded like it's approaching its limits. Bass remains controlled, vocals remain stable, dynamics feel unrestricted. The overall presentation carries a sense of ease that reminded me more of desktop gear than portable gear. If I had to summarize the DX340 MAX's character, I'd call it neutral, but don't mistake that for clinical. Its resolution is outstanding, revealing layers of detail with ease, yet it never sacrifices musical engagement in the process. This is probably the section most people are waiting for, and it's also the most difficult, because the differences aren't dramatic, at least not initially. The standard DX340 already performs at an extremely high level. The family resemblance is unmistakable. The tonal balance is similar, the overall presentation is similar, and in a quick comparison you might even wonder why the Max exists. The differences emerge over time. The Max sounds larger, not necessarily wider, larger. Images feel more dimensional, bass carries more authority, complex recordings feel less congested, and most importantly, everything feels a little more relaxed, as though the player is working less hard. Compared to the DX320 MAX, the jump feels more substantial. The newer player sounds cleaner, more transparent, more organized, and the operating experience is dramatically better. The DX320 MAX sometimes felt like a brilliant audio product wrapped around an average Android experience. The DX340 MAX feels like a flagship audio product and a modern Android device at the same time. Let's start with the negatives, because there are a few. For example, the price is impossible to ignore. At this level, you're competing with some very serious desktop systems. And the law of diminishing returns is fully operational. The regular DX340 gets surprisingly close. The Max is better, I think that's fairly clear. But it's not necessarily 2 to 3 times better. Nothing in audio is. And then there's the size. Portable? Yes. Pocket friendly? Not necessarily. The DX340 MAX is a substantial device, and you'll be reminded of that fact every time you carry it with you. The positives are easier. The sound quality is exceptional. The build quality feels genuinely flagship. The power output borders on excessive. And perhaps my favorite surprise is how polished the overall experience has become. The DX340 MAX isn't just a better sounding player than the DX320 MAX. It's a better device, and that's an important distinction. So, where does it leave us? I don't think the DX340 MAX is a product that can be justified by specifications, or measurements, or even value. It's a product built around pursuit. The pursuit of extracting that last few percent of performance. And whether that matters to you depends entirely on where you are in your audio journey. For some people, the regular DX340 will make far more sense. For others, the Max will represent the end of the road. Not because it's perfect, but because it removes enough compromises that you stop thinking about the device and start thinking about the music. And ultimately, that's probably the highest compliment I can give it. The DX340 MAX didn't make me want to analyze the music, it made me want to keep listening. And for a product at this level, that is exactly what I was hoping for. The DX340 MAX may not be sensible, but then again, the best audio products rarely are.